So let's get started. Hi, my name is Camryn. I am the head of community at Meet Your Class. For an introduction to myself, today, we'll be talking about how social media has kind of shifted throughout the college decision journey, and kind of how you can meet students with, the content, that they're looking for. A lot of people talk, oh, social media, it's so big and students are using it for search. But today we really want to talk about kind of actionable tips for your team. And that's kind of our goal in the Beyond the Scroll today. We're joining with one of our partners from Lebanon Valley College. So I'll let Jaime introduce herself. And then I'm also joined with Jonah from Meet Your Class.
Good afternoon. I'm Jaime Rowe, Director of Marketing and Brand Experience at Lebanon Valley College.
And I'm Jonah. I'm one of the founders of MeetYourClass. And yeah, I'm just very excited for this presentation. I've been building in social media since middle school, actually. And I think the tips in here are going to be very actionable. So I'll pass it back to Camryn.
Yeah, so last year we had our enrollment survey, and that reached over 2,000 students across a variety of schools. And we were really asking them about their college decision factors, the platforms they use, and kind of like what they're valuing in an institution. Our enrollment survey for this year is currently live for this enrollment cycle, but one of our key findings from last year was that students are increasingly using these social media platforms as search engines, and even more than, more traditional sites during their college decision journey. So instead of looking at like rankings or more formal sites to look up, info on colleges, they're turning to like TikTok and Instagram, looking for those like more natural videos, highlights, dorm tours for those quick answers. Most importantly, they're looking for that authentic content. And with that authentic content comes connection. So kind of like I mentioned, students aren't just searching for information. I know that on social media, it's really easy to just post, oh, hey, we were ranked blah, 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 in this, but students are also searching for that connection and each other. Another one of our findings from the survey last year was that 99% of students tried to meet prospective students online throughout their college decision journey. So even though they're searching for, these lower level things, they're also searching for that connection. Even 58% of them said that it's most important to meet those students before they commit to a university. So that shows that even throughout the funnel, even earlier, they're, looking for those connections, not just after they've committed to a school. And this matters because it's not just, rankings or marketing, again, that flashy marketing. It's really about the social proof and connection that you can provide. We'll dive into that, but it's the idea that, if students can find future classmates, see what it's like to be on campus, instead of just saying, this is who we are, it's more, this is how it is to be one of us.
Yeah, and we also just wanted to like set the stage a bit before we get into like more details on how to like source content. Just where we think it's like most valuable to like think about the different buckets. So what we've seen is that there's kind of like three sorts of buckets that perform well and that students are searching for. So the first bucket are kind of like brand awareness social media posts. And these are ones that students may not necessarily be like actively in the search process when they're thinking about. So one of like the most powerful things we've seen is on your main social media pages to feature students who are going to the institution, because those will often reach people who are like younger than them at their schools. But also things like just general college advice and career advice. We see that a lot of people are turning to platforms like Instagram and TikTok to just learn about like what sorts of schools should I even be considering in the first place. And that's an opportunity for your institution to start building up brand awareness by giving that advice. And then also we think that it's like somewhat good to segment content between stuff that appeals to people earlier in the funnel and then stuff later in the funnel. And we've just listed examples here. And we'll share this recording with everyone after so you can reference this later. But I think without delaying it too much, we'll kind of like shift it over to Jaime to describe LVC's strategy.
Thanks, Jonah. We're Lebanon Valley College, located in Annville, Pennsylvania, about 20 minutes east of Hershey, Pennsylvania. As you can see by the numbers, we're on the smaller side, but we know that social media is extremely important in search and brand awareness and enrollment growth. So we have some key strategic areas that we look at. Brand awareness, we're going to use Instagram and TikTok, and we're going to use Facebook for the broader reach and also to engage alumni and community and success stories. Enrollment growth is another objective that we're going to lean on Instagram and TikTok for paid posts and share Valley info with the prospective students. Facebook is great for parents and community influencers and showcases our academic programs, student life, and basic admission info and events. Alumni engagement, also very important, that we see a really strong growth in Facebook. And we highlight alumni success stories and how to stay connected and all of that stuff. And then lastly, another strategic objective is to improve overall brand affinity and loyalty, that the content that humanizes the institution and by telling their student stories. We can move on to that. So TikTok, we're using that for prospective students. They want to know what it's like to live on campus and see that. So we are using student workers, our brand ambassadors, really to help create that content. Nobody really wants to see me on TikTok, but they want to see what it's actually like. So these are just a few of our examples. The second one in there, the one that says campus trends, that went viral for us. And we can talk about what's viral a little later, but what's viral for our institution is not the same for every other institution. Facebook, we go back to Instagram, sorry. Instagram, again, prospective students and current students. This is our main feed, which is separate from Meet Your Class. But this, again, will be academic highlights, student life, and letting the students take over. That has been extremely popular. And then we'll also pepper in like upcoming events and whatnot. And we'll also cross-post this in the Meet Your Class channel. Next slide. Facebook groups. We did this for a good number of years. We had the class of, insert the class year. And then we also did one for parents. This was great when we started it. However, most 16 to 18-year-olds don't have Facebook, don't want Facebook. So we were forcing them onto a platform that they didn't really want to participate. But the example here is, people will post about themselves and their interests and pictures. And then you could also use it as a way to connect with other teammates or look for a roommate. And that was great. But we saw a definite decline over the last 5 years. And we also had parent Facebook groups, which was a way for parents to connect. And that had positives and negatives. The positive things were like if we had students coming from out of state or drastically out of the area, looking for how to get prescriptions filled or where to get their child's car serviced. And that was great. People were sharing information. But then we seem to have taken a turn in the last 2 years of just a lot of complaints. And we would honestly track down all of those complaints and the amount of time it was taking to find out why so-and-so's student wasn't attending their class or didn't like the food. And what we were finding was the students were lying to their parents. And it got really messy. So we pivoted and went looking for another platform. And that's when I found Meet Your Class. And I think it really helped us meet the students where they're at. Parent Facebook groups, we just finally did away with them in the last couple of weeks. It was taking too much time and there wasn't enough good that was coming out of it. So we have a couple other options that we're looking at, but but for the actual students, Meet Your Class really filled the void, filled that piece that we were looking for.
Yeah, and we set the stage earlier that we see that students are looking for different types of content at different stages in the funnel. So earlier in the funnel, and then also in like the brand awareness stage, a lot of it's like specific questions about like the qualitative parts of campus. So if you want to learn like the specific acceptance rates or like a list of the programs at an institution, like we'll see a lot of people turn to Google and look up questions or look at like the US News and World Report or all of those different streams. And then we see people like earlier in the funnel turning to platforms like Instagram and YouTube and TikTok to look up dorm tours and day in the life videos and whatnot. And we were really like, the point of this webinar was to like partially just like call out the fact that students are looking those things up for the institutions that they're interested in. So you really want your institution to show up when people look those things up. So for example, if they look up LVC dorm tours on TikTok, if they see a dorm tour, you're leaving a very good impression on them. But if you don't have a dorm tour and then they're looking at, one of the other institutions they're considering and that school has it, then you're just losing impressions throughout the funnel. And we're going to get more in like a few slides into like how you can find those content gaps, because there's a handful of tools that we think are pretty effective for it. But just to like continue setting the stage and adding more context, we wanted to like speak a little bit more to the kinds of content that people are looking at the end of the funnel. So as Jaime mentioned, I'm actually going to go back a slide for a second. At the later end of the funnel, once people have like gotten into the school and they're debating whether or not they want to go, we see a ginormous influx of students wanting to know who actually goes to this institution and am I going to be able to find friends, a roommate, and that sort of stuff. And for the longest time, that was on Facebook groups, which was really convenient for schools because setting up a Facebook group really doesn't have that many steps to it. But where Meet Your Class kind of like came into the picture was we saw that within the Facebook groups, pretty much all of the content that people were posting and were looking for were these introductions of other students. So you can see an example on the right. It's of someone introducing themselves and just kind of like explaining what they're looking forward to on campus. And then for LVC, what we helped do was bring that same sort of content from Facebook to Instagram. So this is an example of the page that we manage for LVC. And on here, it's the exact same idea. We're basically posting bios of the students who are considering the institution. So right here, you can see like a picture of someone named Eden who's planning on coming to the institution. And then we basically posted this bio of her on the account. And the part of the reason that this is so effective is that this content really reaches far and wide. So we kind of like wanted to like just for some like evidence, call out the different ways that people might naturally come across this content. So the first one is that all 475 prospective students at LVC who are following this Instagram account we set up would see content from the page pretty much every time they opened up Instagram. So once a student follows this account, when they go on Instagram, there's a feed of all of the posts from all of the accounts that they're following. And there's like some nuances because if someone doesn't engage with content from an account, the algorithm won't show content from that account as much. But generally, we see that the engagement with these posts are very high because they're just so organic and natural. It's other students coming to the institution. It's not an advertisement from the school in the traditional sense. So that's one way that you just keep on getting touch points with those students who otherwise might be at risk of summer melt or maybe just choosing a different institution. Another way that we see these accounts like really get in front of people are the algorithm just suggests content from the account to people. So of course, you can get in front of students by placing an ad and that reaching them. But also the Instagram algorithm is constantly just trying to keep students engaged. So it will suggest content that they think is relevant to you. So we will see lots of people joining and following these accounts based on the algorithm being like the first touch point of like suggesting the account to it. So the school doesn't necessarily even need to promote it. Another one is students broadcasting content to their own network. So there's now like a repost feature on Instagram. So when a student reposts themselves being featured on the page, it will then kind of go to all their personal followers, which could definitely include people that you're trying to recruit in future cycles. But that's kind of just a quick overview on these pages. This is what Meet Your Class does, but we definitely wanted to like emphasize that you don't need Meet Your Class to create your own Instagram community. We actually create a guide that walks you through step by step how you can do it on your own. And we would really encourage that if you don't have like a class of 2030 Instagram community for your institution, that it's an initiative you invest in. And part of the reason for that is just these are some results we saw from the past cycle on just the engagement these accounts achieve. So the first one is when we looked at how many individuals were like looking at these Instagram accounts, the overall number across all of the schools we worked with was 91x the size of the incoming class. So if you basically like 1,000 people coming to the school, we would see 91,000 people looking at the account. And in that sense, it really helps with brand awareness because we've heard over and over again that when people are like sophomores in high school, they'll turn to these accounts to just start like learning about the school. And it's also kind of like entertaining. Like my brother was 2 grades above me. So when I was a sophomore in high school, I was looking at all of these, like for him, it was class of 2023 Facebook groups at the time to like see where his friends were going. And that was definitely leaving a good impression on the school for me. We also kind of like track that the average student who features themselves on the community connects with 51 other prospective students. And that's just 51 like additional friendships that'll help hopefully yield them to the school. But it also has this huge ricochet effect where now I'm following 51 people who my main affiliation with them is the school. So now, even if it's something as simple as them posting their prom pictures, it's kind of just like a brand impression for the school because once you see those prom pictures, you think of the university because that's how the two of you connected in the first place. And then also just like one more stat, we see that around 85% of the incoming class will follow these Instagram communities. So therefore, every time they're opening the app, they're just there's more touch points with them. And then kind of just like the last thing we'll say on this point before we move on to just talking about content more broadly, rather than just this specialized content at the end of the funnel, is just that if you are kind of like trying to like socialize the idea of making one of these communities internally, one way that you could like kind of like assign value to it is kind of like juxtaposing the amount of organic impressions these communities get against paid ad spend. So we see that the average community or class of 2029 group gets 3,881 impressions per piece of content. Those impressions are usually very targeted because a lot of it's people either debating going to the institution or debating applying in future cycles. And each piece of content, therefore, has the equivalent of around $49.60 in equivalent ad spend. Because if you pay for 1,000 impressions on Instagram with like a glossy advertisement, that's going to be $12.78. So it's just another way to kind of like think about like why your institution might go about creating one of these communities. But yeah, I'm going to pass it back to Jaime to also just speak a bit more about these benefits.
Yeah, and I'll add just here to jump on real quick is I think that the big thing from Meet Your Class is that, we really want to, and hopefully Jamie will say the same thing, is that we integrate into your social strategy. We're not meant to be, oh, there's this other, platform or this other page that is now having to be managed. It more feeds into that, but I'll pass it to Jamie.
No, I agree. It was a very smooth. Now we started last cycle later in the funnel. So we didn't, this will be our first full year with Meet Your Class, but it was easy to get up and running. And the fact that the student doesn't have to download another app and learn something else, like they already know Instagram, and it just flows really nicely. And anecdotally, I know colleagues in my office that work with some of our first year students have said the students in their class met their roommate through Meet Your Class. So it did exactly what we wanted it to do.
Okay. So the next thing we kind of wanted to get into was just speaking more broadly to your content strategy beyond these like class of communities or anything Meet Your Class really does. And I saw that there was a question in the chat about how you kind of like measure the effectiveness of content. And I would say like social media is a little bit of a black box, but the best thing you can do is just look at the internal tools for all of the platforms you post on. So for example, for like Instagram, that would be Meta Business Suite, which I believe is business.facebook.com. I'll put that in the chat. And then I would just, anytime you do post content, see how many people it's reaching. It'll also give you breakdowns of like the age range being reached. And I think that would be like one way to kind of assess like the effectiveness of different pieces of content. But one of the things Meet Your Class does also is we'll like look at the followers of the social media accounts for the institution, and we'll link those individual accounts to CRM records so that we can see if like maybe there was a piece of content that then caused someone to unfollow the page, that sort of stuff. But yeah, to kind of like dive into this a bit more. So like as we were kind of trying to frame in social media being a search engine, it's like really important to look for content gaps. So we at like Meet Your Class are constantly doing this internally for Google, like just a very traditional search engine. We will look for things that people are looking up on Google. And then if there's no blog post kind of like matching that search prompt, then we'll make a blog post. So then that traffic comes to Meet Your Class. This is like a newer thing, but there's now the same opportunities to do that on platforms like TikTok and Instagram. So in order to do this, you would just fire up the TikTok app. You would go to the search bar, and then you type in creator search insights. And then once you click on creator search insights, you can type in your university name. And then it's similar to what Google's kind of done for a long time. It will list out things that people are looking up that there's no video or no supply for. So again, I used this example earlier, but if someone went on to TikTok and they typed in Lebanon Valley College dorms, this would help you identify if there was no videos about the dorms. So, that's one really good use case. I think the other one is also just finding influencers. So like LVC has an ambassador program, and that's of course not easy to build out at all. So a good starting point for your institution, if you don't have ambassadors, could be to see which current students are already posting content. And then you can reach out to them and ask them if you can repost it, or if you have the budget, offer them a job within the admissions office. I also just wanted to call out that this actually was released, I think, only around like a week ago. Meta just released a very similar tool following in TikTok's footsteps. So this is called Meta Creator Search Insights. In order to get to this, you go to business.facebook.com, as I put in the chat, and then there's a tab on most people's business suites now called Creator Marketplace. And this is just a similar tool where like in this screenshot, you can see I typed in college application advice, and then it'll show me all the people talking about college application advice. You can do the same thing by like then filtering down to people talking about that stuff within your state or any of the stuff that's interesting. And then you can reach out directly to them. And again, this is just something that we would really encourage you guys to do, because if you have a budget for like the glossy paid ads, we find that a lot of times this performs better, getting people who have like more trust with the audience to kind of speak to it. And then there's kind of like two other ideas that we wanted to call out for curating content. This is another one that was more recently released. So there's a company called Unidays, which has formed partnerships with Instagram, TikTok, and Snapchat. And within TikTok, Instagram, and Snapchat, you students can now basically like add to their profiles like a verified badge saying I'm part of this incoming, or I'm part of this class. So you can see like we have University of Michigan here because that's where Blake and I went. So we, through Unidays, had access to those communities. But basically what I would suggest doing is, since you have a .edu address for your institution, you can go on Instagram, go on TikTok, go on Snapchat. You can join the Unidays community. You do that by going to like the personal tab. So like on Instagram, it'd be the far tab on the right. You would click add school. You would add the institution. It'll have you authenticate with your .edu address. And then you can see a list of all of the students who through that platform have like verified that they go to your institution. And it's just yet another way to then see who is posting about the school. I don't have this in here, but I would also similarly just look up hashtags that people are posting with your school to find that content. And then the last thing I was going to speak about on this end before we talk more about like broader initiatives would be that we would just constantly encourage you to add collaborators to any post you make and then encourage people to repost the content. This is the reason that Meet Your Class content and the class of 2030 communities perform so well. It's because it's the contents of students themselves. So they repost it to their own following. And then there's a huge domino effect where you're getting all of these impressions that you didn't otherwise need to pay for. But even if the content's not featuring a student, you can still encourage your ambassadors, your student government, accounts for other departments at your schools to repost the content. So then you can reach their entire following list and really expand beyond the people who actively opted to follow your page however many weeks, months, or years ago. Okay, Camryn?
Yeah, so next, just going to talk about some like higher level initiatives. So I know that Jaime also has some experience with student creators, but also I'll just speak to my experience. I worked with, when I worked at Meet Your Class early on, I worked with a lot of student ambassadors. And I will say that the less guidelines that you give them, the better the videos turn out. Because honestly, those students, your students know the campus, they know their story. Most of the time, a student is going to want to listen to another student more than, someone that's doing more polished marketing. And also, their For You pages and their algorithms are pretty similar to those of that prospective students and the people that you're trying to reach. So they're able to kind of jump on platforms easier. Jaime, I don't know if you want to add anything there.
I agree. I mean, I can't keep up with all of the trends on top of everything else, so I rely on the student workers to do that. And honestly, the pieces that are the students do far better than any polished high production that we pay vendors to do. So I always go with less is more, and it seems to really work nicely for us.
Yeah, I was gonna say it always seems like the ones that are just like take like 10 seconds to record and throw some text over it, do so much better than the ones that you've been like editing for hours and hours. So that's just something to keep in mind, let your student ambassadors kind of take that lead. amplifying content. So kind of, making sure that your content gets past your followers and everything. A little bit ago, I wrote a blog on, Instagram's SEO and kind of how they're pushing more and more towards the search engine, which is really kind of what we've been talking about all day today. But I think like, when you're writing these captions for TikTok, for Instagram, for whatever it may be, think that write it like you're writing, or answering students' commonly searched questions or phrases, things that they might actually type into the search bar. So instead of like very polished, like move-in day, like blah, 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 maybe it's just like, what is move-in day like at XYZ? Or what should I pack for going to school at XYZ institution? Kind of just that natural language. Another thing to keep in mind is that hashtags are great, but I think that it's really important to only use the most relevant hashtags. That goes for TikTok, for Instagram, really for anything. That's going to help your content get discovered by the people that want to see it. But also, you'll see that I have that TikTok. TikTok had a recent update that you can actually only add up to 5 hashtags. So that kind of shows even more of these platforms pushing towards, okay, make sure these hashtags are relevant instead of that FYP, a hashtag that's very relevant to the post. Next, again, is repurposing content. Sorry for the mess of the slide deck there for a second, but repurposing content. So I think that it's really important. I know that if you have a small team, if you're at one of the smaller schools, you're really able to repurpose content. So something that's posted on Instagram or TikTok, can also be posted vice versa. Even if that's just changing the caption, changing, the text or the audio, things like that. Another tip for kind of like the repurposing content that I'd like to add in here is just like, if you're ever going around campus or you're struggling to kind of get the content, one tip that I would say is kind of like record that B-roll of campus. So just kind of like random videos of walking around campus. Then you'll kind of have something ready to go for when there's a random text trend that you can just throw some text on Instagram or on TikTok and a sound on, and then, you've hopped on a trend. But that's just something to kind of have in your back pocket as a tip to repurpose content because that B-roll is always great to use as a placeholder. Go to the next slide.
So for us, defining viral, I always laugh because, we're average for TikTok. I mean, 2,000 views is good for us, but things like our move-in day, how to unpack a car in 16 seconds on TikTok, that went to 193,000 views. So that's huge for us. A school with only 1,600 undergrads, to get that, that's pretty cool. We had one of our field hockey TikToks is in the millions, and they actually got reposted by Slim Jims. And so what we're looking at is just the back end in each of those tools, like Jonah had said earlier. And then I put up another example. This is on our alumni Facebook page when Taylor and Travis got engaged. It was a play on Love Story, and at the Valley, we often joke about the number of alums that marry each other, or you find your best friend or your partner. So we did a post, and you can see like 34,000 views, 18,000 reach, 519 interactions. That's huge for us on the alumni page, and just gives everyone warm and fuzzies. And what was really interesting about that post was it was recent alums, but also alums going back to the 50s and 60s that also posted their LVC love story. So that was just a great post. But to answer a question from earlier, I'm just looking at the inherent views and whatnot on the back end of TikTok or the back end of Facebook and Meta. We're not big enough to, I stopped paying to look at stuff. It's all right there. I know that this, in my opinion, the stuff that is not planned does better than things that I spend days curating. That's just the way I feel that it works. So these were just two great examples of what viral was for us.
Well, yeah, so that is a conclusion to the webinar. I think two resources just to call out is one, and we're gonna have someone send this in the chat, but Ashley, if you could send it. But the first one is just the guide to make your own class of 2030 Instagram. This is something that MeetYourClass does automatically, but you by no means need to work with us to run a community like this. So we've put out this resource just so anyone can know how to approach that. And just kind of how this shifted from Facebook to Instagram a few years ago. And then also we put together a case study, which is trying to like actually measure what it means to have these viral moments and how that impacts enrollment outcomes. It's not something that we can perfectly tie A to B for, but we try to do like a good job of just like looking at things like how many people make connections because of communities like this, how many prospective students are reached. And really like the main thing we're like juxtaposing that against is how that compares to just placing ads on Meta or TikTok or whatnot as is. But yeah, we'll stick around for questions, but otherwise that's kind of a conclusion to the webinar. So thank you so much for coming. We really appreciate it.
Yeah, I was going to say, Jonah, we do have a question in the QA. So if you guys do have any questions, please feel free to type them in there or in the chat or whatever. But it looks like one of the questions is, how does Meet Your Class complement what colleges are already doing on Instagram or TikTok? So I don't know, Jaime, Jonah, if you guys want to jump in there.
Well, for Lebanon Valley, we, like I said, we wanted to meet the students where they were. So Meet Your Class kind of became like the aggregate for the Instagram accounts. And then on the back end, what I really like is I can go in and see, jokingly, when students make it Instagram official, like you kind of know that they're going to be coming to the college, even though they haven't deposited. So it's a great way for our admissions counselors to quick scroll through and identify those and just maybe send a text or a phone call. Say, hey, we saw this. We just want to make sure you have any questions. What do we need to do to help you make that deposit? So that it's been a great tool for us.
I'd also just add, just for more context again on like where we play into the picture. So we were like suggesting throughout this webinar to post content that helps with brand awareness and the early funnel search stuff. The Meet Your Class communities do a really good job of this last piece of like who will be in my class, which we find is one of the most like searched for and sought after things later in the funnel. So a lot of our partnerships are just built around like filling that content gap, because the larger like state institutions and whatnot that you might be competing against, there's a very good chance that through just like the ginormous pool of students concerning that institution, someone will create like an Instagram group or a Facebook group or whatnot to fill that content void. So we're kind of working with schools like LVC to make sure that there's that same like opportunity for their students as well. And also you'll kind of notice if you read the guide on how to create a class of 2030 community, there's like 10 million manual steps to doing it. Meet Your Class actually started because Blake and I were manually running a page. It's just very tedious. It's something that you would kind of have to like offload to someone within the admissions office or like a student ambassador, and it probably wasn't in their original job description. So that's another place where Meet Your Class comes in, is just automating all of those tasks.
Yeah. Just to add one little thing, I always say that you guys probably have better things to do with your time than copy and pasting bios. So that's kind of like why, Meet Your Class is there also, so you can actually, track what's in those bios without having to scroll through Instagram and everything. But we'll stay on for a little bit in case there's any other QA questions that pop up. But thank you guys all so much for attending our webinar. And I hope you guys have a great rest of your week.